There are also a variety of other things that you could do inside of a table to adjust the layout and design of your spreadsheet. So here we have a basic blank table, and I can click on any column I want by clicking the column head. And if I move my cursor over the line on either side of it, I can drag to adjust the width of the column. And this is very important because sometimes you want thin columns for some items and sometimes you want wider ones. I can select multiple columns, so I'm going to use Shift and click here, and I have 3 columns, and when I adjust the width there, I'm adjusting the width for those 3 columns all in unison. Now if you want something more precise, you could actually select a column and then you can go to Format, Table, and then you have row and column size, and this applies to what you have currently selected. So if I wanted to make this exactly 2 inches, I could, and then I could make this one exactly 1 inch, half the size. So you can do some precise things there. The same thing is true for the rows. So I can take a row and I can make this one a little wider. And I can select a whole bunch of rows and make them all wider. I can set the heights for them to something very exact if I wanted. You can also merge cells. So merging cells is pretty straightforward to do. You select multiple cells like these 6 here, and then you go to Table, Merge Cells, and it makes one cell. This is actually the cell here, this top left corner. That's one represented, and these others basically just don't exist for this. Now you wouldn't necessarily want to do that in the middle of a table like that, but it's fairly common to do something, say, for a header. So I'll do 2 header rows, and let's say I want to do something like, I'll call this one Item, and then I want to have prices. Here I want to do 3 different prices. So I can do Old, Current, and New. And what I would like is, instead of having these empty cells here, this one just stretch all the way across. So I'll go Table and then Merge Cells, and it's one cell now. And now I can go to Text and center that, and it centers there in that one large cell. So you could use merging of cells to actually improve your layout in various ways like that. You could also hide columns and rows. So I could select a column here, for instance, and I can go Table, Hide Column. And you can see I have column D, I have column F, column E is missing. It's still there. The data is still preserved in there, and you can go to Unhide All Columns. This is really common to use actually, because sometimes you do various calculations and you want to hide some intermediate steps. So for instance, this could be, the difference between the new price and the current price there. And then this could be a formula like if this difference is greater than 0.5, then you put a bunch of exclamation points, otherwise nothing. So the idea being that this is difference, and this is a kind of note or something like that, or alert, and then you decide you don't really need to see this here, so you could go to Table, Hide Column, or you can click here actually and do Hide Column, and that column is still there. It's still performing its calculation, and this is still grabbing E3 just as it did before, but you just aren't bothered by it being there visually. So it's pretty common to do. You can also hide rows if you need to. So I can select a bunch of rows, and I can hide these 5 rows in there, and you can see it jumps from 5 to 11. So that's useful also. Some tables have a lot of complexity to them, and sometimes hiding various rows or columns can help you see the data that you want. Just looking through the rest of the entries here in table, we've got the ability to add rows and columns or delete them. You also have by default checked freeze header rows and freeze header columns, and this means that when you scroll up, these header rows stay there, and even though you're missing some rows there, you can see it slides underneath. And the same thing for those. If you don't want that, if that is something that's bothering you, you can get rid of those. You could resize columns to fit the content. So if you have a lot of data in there and you just want to have an automatic resize, you could do that, and you could see it shrinks everything down to basically the size of like the largest item in there. And you can also distribute rows and columns evenly. So if you were to go in here and maybe mess this up a bit and make some of the columns bigger than others, you could go into here and say distribute the columns evenly, and it evens them all out while the whole thing takes up about the same amount of space. Also, you have the ability to transpose rows and columns. So taking the entire table and basically turning it 90 degrees. That's really useful in some situations, especially when somebody's new to a spreadsheet type of environment. A lot of times they will put items that really should be columns and they'll make them rows, several items here, and then try to go across. And really, thinking in terms of a database, the rows represent records and the columns represent fields in that record. So that's the way you want to keep it. But sometimes when you start with just a small number of items, it can be easy to do the opposite, and then the ability to transpose, get things going the right way, is really useful. The last item here is wrap text, and that's checked by default. But if I have something that's like a really long description, like let's say there's a couple more columns here, and this is notes, and I could say, you can see how it makes this row taller here to fit the text. But I can go and select this one cell and say don't wrap the text, and instead it overlays the next cell. So the next cell gets overwritten unless there's an item in there. So if I put anything in there, like a 0, then you can see it just gets cut off instead. So in this case, with notes at the end of a table like this, it works out really well. And this is the primary use for this that I've seen, is to have something like that. And then you may have some other things here that are more rarely used. And you could certainly use them and everything's fine, nothing breaks. You just can't read the rest of this text unless you click on it, and then you can look down here and read it.